And once again, I want to say greetings to each and every one of you. Aquaba and welcome. Welcome to another round of the Conscious Rasta Report here on LIB Radio, LIB TV, here on livinginblack.com. My name is Keedy Awadu, aka the Conscious Rasta. Weekday mornings, you and I get together live. We come at you from 9 a.m. Pacific time. That's 12 noon Eastern time, 5 p.m. GMT, and 7 p.m. East Africa time. We get together with you, and we deal with culture, consciousness, historical perspectives. We deal with entertainment, economics, education, health, labor, law, politics, religion, family, conflict, future studies, Pan-African affairs, sustainable development, all areas of human interactivity and development. Today's date is Tuesday, the 22nd day of October, the year 2024 in the Western calendar. This corresponds to the year 6265 in the Kemetic calendar, to which we have realigned our cultural clock. Welcome to the 7th millennium. You have found your family in a peaceful place on LIB Radio, LIB TV, and livinginblack.com. Let me give you the introduction for today's program. We are continuing the series of studies going into my upcoming book, Disaster Preparedness for World Wars 5 and 6, the untold story of how the global economic and security order is shaping up for the 21st century. Today on LIB Radio, we try to compress the dense and complicated history of the Second World War into a narrative that allows us to see key events in light of a background that is rarely, if ever, expressed. That World War II was more a contest of an alliance of fascist powers attempting to steal the empires of their capitalist rivals. Many vital elements go into our reassessment of this global conflict that are consistently left out of the mainstream retelling of the importance of World War II. So that's what we got on the table today. I've been furiously researching, furiously writing to the very best of my abilities, and I think we do have a pretty comprehensive, compelling narrative to be able to share on the topic of the day. So, without any further hesitance, I'm going to pull up my book that I'm writing. We're going to this chapter. This is the third chapter of the book, and I probably will maybe insert another chapter or so before we start to examine each of these wars. Again, the theme of the book, Disaster Preparedness for World Wars 5 and 6. So today, we're going to take another look at broader look at World War II, the rise of fascist order. I began each chapter with a relevant quote, I think not only relevant to the topic, but also enlightening towards this new, deeper perspective. This one comes to us from George Orwell, the author of the very famous book, 1984. He wrote, and I quote, "In a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." George Orwell. Very profound. Let me copy, cut, and paste that for my listening audience today, because I really do think that that particular theme and this revolutionary act that we are engaging here on LIB Radio is something that should be paid closely attention to in the time of great deceit. Telling the truth is a revolutionary act. George Orwell. Let's go forward. I am certainly not the only journalist unhappy with history teaching in the public education system. Too often, this historical perspective is driven more by the imperatives of propaganda then founded upon the complete sharing of facts that empower the student to see history accurately in real time. Today, we try to compress the dense and complicated history of the Second World War into a narrative that allows us to see key events in light of a background that is rarely, if ever, expressed. Let me begin this. Again, we attempt to compress the dense and complicated history of the Second World War into a narrative that allows us to see key events considering a background that is rarely, if ever, expressed. That World War II was more a contest of an alliance of fascist powers attempting to steal the empires of their capitalist rivals. Many vital elements go into our reassessment of this global conflict that are consistently left out of the mainstream retelling of the importance of World War II. There are just so many details. Let me begin with a 10-point chronology of significant events between the end of the First Great War, the Great War they actually called it, World War I, 1918, and the greater outbreak of World War II, 1939. So here is a brief chronology of the interim war period. Number 1, 1918, the end of World War I. The armistice is signed on November 11, 1918, leading to the end of combat hostilities in Europe. Point 2, 1919, the Treaty of Versailles. Signed on June 28, 1919, this treaty formally ended the state of war between Germany and the Allied powers, imposing heavy reparations and territorial losses on Germany. 1919 to 1923, the Russian Civil War rages on as the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, fight against the White Army and foreign intervention. Lenin died in 1924, after which the ruthless dictator Joseph Stalin consolidated power over the Soviet Union. 1919, the British and American governments, along with other Allied powers, intervened militarily in the Russian Civil War, supporting the unsuccessful White Russian forces during their civil war against the Bolshevik Red Army. 1920, Polish-Soviet War. A conflict between Poland and Russia occurred, culminating in the Battle of Warsaw, 1920, where Poland successfully defended its independence. Point 6, 1922, Italy turns fascist. Benito Mussolini and the Fascist Party rise to power in Italy. 1923, hyperinflation in Germany. The Weimar Republic experiences severe hyperinflation, leading to economic instability and social unrest, undermining confidence in the government. 1924, the Dawes Plan. The Dawes Plan is implemented to restructure Germany's reparations payments and stabilize its economy, temporarily easing tensions. 1929, the Great Depression. The stock market crash in the United States led to a major global economic recession, exacerbating political instability and contributing to the rise of extremist movements in Europe. 1933. Amid much intrigue and subterfuge, including the torching of Germany's government headquarters, the Reichstag, Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany on January 30, 1933, marking the beginning of Nazi rule and the complete dismantling of democratic institutions of the Weimar Republic in Germany. 1935. Nuremberg Laws. The Nazi regime enacts laws that institutionalize racial discrimination against Jews, stripping them of citizenship and civil rights. 1935. Germany remilitarizes the Rhineland, violating the Treaty of Versailles. 1936. Remilitarization of the Rhineland. Oh, this is the same point. Germany violates the Treaty of Versailles by sending troops into the demilitarized Rhineland, testing the resolve of Britain and France. So I'll have to somehow reconcile why I have two dates on there, 1935 and 1936. Probably I can just change the 35 to, or just put a hyphen in there, 1935 to 1936, and actually eliminate the first one, and now it's reconciled. Okay, 1936, the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, also known as the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. Italy's assault took place from October 1935 to May 1936 and served as a significant precursor to World War II. During the invasion, Italy tested new weapons on the largely defenseless Africans, including bomber aircraft, heavy artillery, tanks, chemical weapons, and modern infantry weapons, including rifles, machine guns, and mortars. The Italian invasion led to international condemnation and sanctions. 1936 to 1939. Italy and Germany support Spanish fascism. Italy and Germany supported Francisco Franco's nationalists during the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939. Italy sent troops, aircraft, and supplies, while Germany provided the Condor Legion, which offered air support and military aid. Their involvement aimed to strengthen fascism in Spain and test military strategies ahead of World War II. 1937. The Second Sino-Japanese War begins with the Japanese invasion of China. 1938. Germany annexes Austria, Anschluss, and Italy. And also for that year, Italy and, let me put a period in here, Italy and Germany sign the Pact of Steel, forming the Axis Alliance. 1938, the Munich Agreement. On September 30, 1938, Britain and France agree to allow Nazi Germany to annex the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia in a policy of appeasement, hoping to avoid war. 1939, Germany occupies the remainder of Czechoslovakia, and Italy invades Albania. These events mark the final stages of appeasement and the beginning of a more aggressive Nazi expansion, ultimately leading to the outbreak of a wider war. 1939, the invasion of Poland. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. prompting Britain and France to declare war on Germany on September 3rd, marking the official start of World War II. The USSR invades Poland from the east on September 17, further expanding the conflict. And this brief chronology, I did leave out a couple. There are a couple of other events that come in here as well, and this in this pre-war period. But again, the U.S. doesn't enter until 2 years later, in 1941, just as the U.S. was late to enter the First World War, allowing the other powers to kind of decimate their military capabilities before the U.S. steps into the powder keg. This brief chronology highlights key political, social, and economic developments that contributed to the rise of tensions leading to World War II. These events represent the complex and tumultuous period between the end of World War I and the beginning of World War II, characterized by the rise of fascist and nationalist regimes, territorial aggression, and the erosion of international agreements and norms. And let me put in here imperial ambitions, imperial ambitions, another key factor there. So again, these events represent the complex and tumultuous period between the end of World War I and the beginning of World War II, characterized by the rise of fascist and nationalist regimes, imperial ambitions, territorial aggression, and the erosion of international agreements and norms. Next, I go to a sub-chapter here, and let me just quickly double check to make sure my listening audience, if you're there, check in, everybody. If you can, please do hit the like button for the recording today, but just type a couple of words into the chat. We'd love to hear from you, to know that you're in the house, to know that you do care about the subjects or topics that we engage in here on LIB Radio, LIB TV, and livinginblack.com. So, continuing, here we go. Next subchapter of this chapter, again, this chapter entitled World War I. No, this is entitled The Rise of Fascist Order. The next subchapter is Fascism, excuse me, Fascism versus Democracy, Colonial Empires, and Neo-Colonialism. 1 second here, let me wet my throat. And we continue. During World War II, fascist regimes in Italy and Germany exploited colonial empires to further their own interests. Fascism's authoritarian and nationalist ideology often converged with colonialism's goals of domination and exploitation. The British and French colonial empires, in particular, provided fascist powers with strategic resources, markets, and manpower. Italy's fascist regime, under Benito Mussolini, sought to establish a new Roman Empire, and its colonial ambitions in Africa and the Mediterranean were driven by fascist ideology. Germany's Nazi regime, under Adolf Hitler, pursued a similar strategy, using its colonial territories in Africa and the Pacific to supply resources and troops for its military campaigns. Now we come to where I share a chronological list of key events of World War II. There has been a significant gap in Western education concerning Japan's militarist empire building leading into the Second World War. Here are the dates of Japanese imperial conquests between the end of World War I and the start of World War II. So, 1931, Japanese invasion of Manchuria, September of that year. 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War begins, July 7. Also 1937, the Japanese capture of Shanghai, January 28. 1938, Japanese capture of Wuhan, October 28. 1940, Japanese invasion of Indochina, July 2022. And again, Indochina was part of the French Empire. 1941, Japanese invasion of the Philippines, December 8. And also 1941, the Japanese invasion of Malaya. It should say Malaysia, but it says Malaya. I'll double check that and reconfirmed, because it could have been the name change after the British took over Malaysia. 1941, Japanese invasion of Malaya, December 8th. Thus, with this understanding, the Japanese, Italian, German, and Spanish fascist aggressions predate the officially stated outbreak of the Second World War, I will next apply a long list only focusing on key events of World War II. My readers are encouraged to pick certain key periods and search out books, documentary films, and other published reports on the countless points of conflict that constituted this important milestone in the history of the world. We've already discussed the true beginnings of the global conflict that could be categorized as the Second World War, which commenced with the Italian invasion of Ethiopia in 1936, as well as Italian and German support in the Spanish Civil War during that same year. Here I will continue with an admittedly truncated chronology of key events of World War II. Key events of 1939. September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland, marking the start of all-out warfare in the heart of Europe. September 3rd, 1939, Britain and France declare war on Germany. September 17, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, following the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Stalin and Hitler that sought to maintain peace between Russia and Germany. Key events of 1940. April 9, Germany invades Denmark and Norway in Operation Weserübung. And excuse me, my German language is completely, totally absent. May 10, 1940. In June, Germany launches invasions of the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. May 14, the same year, these are all 1940. May 14, the Netherlands surrenders to Germany. May 26 through June 4, the Dunkirk evacuation, Operation Dynamo, occurs, rescuing humiliated Allied troops fleeing France. Fleeing France. Bear with me, my tongue and my brain are synchronizing today. June 10. Italy declares war on France and the United Kingdom. June 14. And interesting, this story about Italy declaring war on France and the United Kingdom, despite, let me put this in here because this is very important, despite that fact that 70 to 80%, I'll get the number correct, well, I'll double check that, of its merchant fleet was deployed and immediately seized by hostile forces. That just shows you just one example of just how incompetent was the leadership of Benito Mussolini. He declares a war on two countries with very powerful navies while its merchant fleet was not even in port. But that's just the way it is. Still key events of 1940. June 14, Paris falls to German forces. June 25, German forces occupied Paris. German forces, I say, occupied Paris and divide France into two parts. June 22, 1940, France signs an armistice with Germany, leading to the division of the country. And again, those were out of sequence. July 11, 1940 through October 31st, the Battle of Britain takes place, with the Royal Air Force defending against attacks from the German Luftwaffe. August 22, the Battle of Britain air campaign ends with the German Luftwaffe failing to gain air superiority over the UK. And I guess I'll make a correction on these dates because they overlap. July 10 through October 31st, the Battle of Britain, and then August 22, the Battle of Britain air campaign ends. And so there's absolutely something there that needs to be reconciled. And again, you're seeing how I write the books. I'm going to try and do the best I can to point out, call out, identify whatever possible errors are there. Go back and reconfirm these. September 7, 1940, the Blitz, a series of German bombing raids on British cities, begins. Let's go to key events of 1941. Germany launches a surprise attack on Yugoslavia and Greece. May 20, Germany invades the Soviet Union, beginning Operation Barbarossa. June 22, again 1941, the United States freezes German and Italian assets in response to their aggressive actions. Also June 22, Germany launches Operation Barbarossa, invading the Soviet Union, which I think that the earlier one, May 20, see, I got these results from different AI search engines. I'm pretty sure the May 20 date is incorrect, but I'll go through and reconcile these. September, the siege of Leningrad, a prolonged and brutal battle, continues as German forces attempt to capture the city. The siege would last for 872 days, from September 1941 to January 1944. December 7, 1941, Japan launches a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, drawing the United States into World War II. And there's one missing here. And also in 1941, the U.S. sanctions Japan for its aggressions and imposes an oil embargo on the Japanese empire. That's a very, very important point. So going forward, where we at? Where we is? Imposes. Okay. December 7, 1941, Japan launches a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, Drawing the U.S. into World War II, December 8, 1941, the United States declares war on Japan. December 11, 1941, Germany and Italy declare war on the United States. That takes us to 1942. We're still working on our timeline. Key events of 1942 that we would will to pay attention to. Again, love to hear from you, our listening audience. I know you're out there today. Do let us know what you think about today's research about this investigation. Let's continue. We are up to 1942, did I say? Yeah, I did say that. 1942, key events. January 20, the Wannsee Conference is held, where Nazi officials plan, quote, the final solution, unquote. The systematic extermination of Jews, Marxists, Gypsies, mixed race, Slavs, and other ethnic and other minorities. February 15, the Battle of Singapore begins, with Japanese forces capturing the city and forcing British and Commonwealth troops to surrender. June 6 and 7, the Battle of Midway occurs, with the United States Navy defeating a Japanese naval force and turning the tide of the war in the Pacific. August 19, the Allies launch Operation Torch, a campaign to capture French North Africa from German and Italian forces. August 23 of 1942 through August 1943, the Battle of Stalingrad takes place, ultimately resulting in a decisive Soviet victory and considered the point of turning the tide against the series of rapid victories of Germany's powerful military. And recognizing, yes, I do have two references to Stalingrad. So let me highlight that and reconcile those two. Let's go to key events of 1943. May 13, Axis forces in Tunisia surrender to the Allies, ending the North African campaign. July 5th, Operation Citadel, the Battle of Kursk, begins, a massive tank offensive launched by German forces near Kursk in the Soviet Union. The battle would ultimately result in significant losses for the German army and marking a turning point on the Eastern Front. July 10, again 1943, the Allied invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, and here, bear with me, mouse, where you is. Operation Husky commences July 10. In rapid succession, the Allies landed in mainland Italy, pushing German troops north. Rome was liberated in June 1944. And so, yeah, that's a year later. September 3rd, still 1943, Italy surrenders to the Allies, although German forces continued to fight in the country. Key events of 1944. June 6, the D-Day invasion of Western Europe, Operation Overlord occurs, with Allied forces landing on numerous beaches of Normandy, France. July 20, the assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler fails. August 25, Paris is liberated by Allied forces and partisan French resistant fighters. December 16 through January 25, 1945, the Battle of the Bulge begins, Germany's last major offensive in the West. Key events of 1945, January 20, the Soviet Union begins its push into Poland. February 4, the Yalta Conference takes place, outlining post-war reorganization and reparations. February to March, again 1945, the Battle of Iwo Jima, April to June, the Battle of Okinawa. April 12th, President Franklin D. Roosevelt dies, and Vice President Harry S. Truman becomes President of the United States. April 29, the U.S. 45th Infantry Division liberates the Dachau concentration camp in Bavaria, discovering some 30,000 interned and emaciated prisoners. It is believed that 41,500 died at Dachau. In reprisal, the liberators beat surrendering SS guards and machine gunned between 30 and 50 Germans after a brief field trial. April 30, Adolf Hitler commits suicide in his bunker in Berlin. May 7, Germany surrenders unconditionally to the Allies, marking the end of the war in Europe. August 6 and 9, the United States becomes the only nation in history to use nuclear bombs as weapons of mass destruction, dropping atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively. August 9, Stalin agreed at the Yalta Conference in February to enter the USSR into the war against Japan 3 months after Germany's surrender, which would have been August 9, 1945. It is believed that this threat of intervention by the powerful Soviet military, and not the use of atomic weapons, that convinced Japan that it stood no chance of survival against the Allied powers. September 2, Japan formally surrenders, officially ending World War II. These events highlight many of the major milestones and turning points of the war. We would love to have the time and space to add many more details to these transforming events. I highly encourage the readers to engage in more in-depth research into whatever of these events catches your attention. The more that we know about the root causes of war and conflict should facilitate our ability to avoid these catastrophic challenges in the future. So let's continue to look closer at the social and political forces underpinning the rise of World War II and continuing into its aftermath. So I begin the next subchapter, Fascism and Neo-Colonialism. In the post-war period, fascist ideologies and colonial practices continued to influence international relations. The United States in particular emerged as a neo-colonial power, using its economic and military might to maintain control over former colonial territories and exert influence over newly independent nations. The Cold War provided a context for neo-colonialism, as the United States and the Soviet Union vied for global influence. The U.S. supported authoritarian regimes and intervened militarily in various regions, often citing the need to contain communism. This led to the establishment of client states and the perpetuation of economic and political dependencies. The next subchapter, Democracy and Anti-Colonialism. In contrast, anti-colonial movements and democratic ideals emerged as powerful forces during World War II and the post-war period. The Allied powers' rhetoric of freedom and self-determination resonated with colonized peoples who began to demand independence and autonomy. The United Nations 1945 Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 1948 enshrined principles of sovereignty, non-interference, and human rights, which challenged colonialism and neo-colonialism. The decolonization process accelerated in the 1950s and 1960s as many African and Asian countries gained independence. Next, fascism and democracy in the modern era. In the contemporary era, fascism and neo-fascist movements have re-emerged, often drawing on colonial and imperialist ideologies. These movements often reject democratic values and human rights, instead promoting authoritarianism, nationalism, and xenophobia. I think we can see that exact same trend on the rise in the United States, especially with this election just 2 weeks away. And it's hard for me to point out which side tends to be more fascist, authoritarian, xenophobic, and nationalist than the other, to be honest. In response, democratic forces and anti-fascist movements continue to advocate for human rights, social justice, and international cooperation. The struggle between fascism and democracy remains ongoing. And I would say between fascism and capitalist democracy, because the democracy is impotent in the face of capitalist economic domination. The struggle between fascism and capitalist democracy remains ongoing, with implications for global politics, economies, and societies. So let's close this chapter out with key takeaways from today's analysis. Point 1, fascist and colonial empires converged during World War II, with fascist powers exploiting colonial resources and manpower. Point 2, neo-colonialism emerged in the post-war period as the United States and other powers maintained control over former colonies and exerted influence over newly independent nations. Point 3, anti-colonial movements and democratic ideals challenged colonialism and neo-colonialism, leading to decolonization and the establishment of human rights principles. Point 4, fascist and neo-fascist movements continue to draw upon colonial, to draw upon colonial, where we is, style, this, normal, here we go. Continue to draw upon colonial, bear with me, I know what I'm doing, I just can't seem to get it done in real time while talking at the same time. Fascist and neo-fascist movements continue to draw on colonial and imperialist ideologies, while democratic forces and anti-fascist movements advocate for human rights, social justice, and international cooperation. Very important point. Let me reread that since I was trying to edit it in the background. Don't do that. Fascist and neo-fascist movements continue to draw on colonial and imperialist ideologies, while democratic forces and anti-fascist movements advocate for human rights, social justice, and international cooperation. The dynamics of World War II can be understood through the lens of fascism versus democracy, colonial empires, and neo-colonialism. Here's a breakdown of these concepts. Concept number 1, fascism versus democracy. Fascism. This was characterized by authoritarian nationalism, dictatorial power, and suppression of opposition. Key fascist powers during World War II included Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler and Italy under Benito Mussolini. These regimes sought to expand their territories and impose their ideologies through aggressive militarism. And I would say Germany under Hitler, Italy under Benito Mussolini, and Japan under Hito. And I'll have to correct that sentence here a little bit later. Hirohito. Democracy, in contrast, again, we're talking about fascism versus democracy. The Allied powers, including the United States, United Kingdom, and France, represented democratic ideals. Yeah, partially. Because of colonialism. They fought to preserve democratic governance, individual freedoms, and human rights against the totalitarian ambitions of the Axis powers. And we do know that to be propaganda and not the truth. Point 2, we're talking about in this section here, bear with me. Point 2, we're talking about in this section is entitled Key Takeaways. Point 2 is colonial empires. Colonialism. Before and during World War II, many European powers maintained vast colonial empires in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. These empires were built on the exploitation of colonized peoples and resources. The war significantly weakened these colonial powers, leading to a wave of decolonization in the post-war period. Decolonization. After World War II, bear with me. Decolonization. After World War II, many colonies gained independence, driven by nationalist movements and the weakened state of European powers. This period saw the end of direct colonial rule and the emergence of new nations. And point number 3 on the subject of neo-colonialism. Neo-colonialism. Despite the end of formal colonialism, many former colonies continued to experience economic and political dominance by their former colonizers. This phenomenon, known as neo-colonialism, involves direct control through economic means such as trade agreements, foreign aid, and the influence of multinational corporations. And it also is not just trade agreements, foreign aid, and multinational corporations, but also includes dominance over international banking and monetization policies. France dominating Africa is a clear example of that, such as France's continued domination over African central banks and currency. Going forward, economic exploitation, another hallmark of neo-colonialism. Neo-colonialism often results in the continued exploitation of a developing country's resources and labor, perpetuating inequalities established during the colonial era. These elements highlight the complex interplay of ideologies and power structures that shaped the global landscape during and after World War II. So that takes us to the end of what I've written for today. Again, there's quite a bit of formatting yet to do and writing yet to do on this. tomorrow, or not tomorrow, next week on Monday, we're going to pick these studies back up. I will be writing all during the week and getting things ready for a fresh study. Next week, we're going to go into World War III, where the Cold War blazed hot. And let me tell you, the Cold War did blaze very, very hot during World War III. But what were some of the key takeaways for today's conversation? For one, we began with this idea of rethinking the fundamental causes of the war. Again, I began with this quote by George Orwell: "In a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." And so we had to separate ourselves, distinguish our analysis, our narrative about World War II from what I perceived a propaganda-laden social engineering intention of the public education system. And it's still ongoing. It is still ongoing. Had the other side won in the long run, World War II, had the fascist powers dominated and won, then the history we would be taught about World War II would be polar opposite, 180 degrees opposite of what we've been given. And again, they often talk about the fight for freedom against fascism, when in actuality, America's freedom has, in many ways, in the aftermath of the now ongoing and not completed but still ongoing collapse of U.S. global empire, we're seeing the rise of fascism on the domestic scene ever more and ever more. So we got to be accurate in our analysis. Key hallmarks, key takeaway was I was particularly proud of the analysis of the between the wars period, the interim period between the end of the Great War and the beginning of the Second European War. And recognize, people, this was just a 28-year period between the armistice. Was it 28 days? No, 28 years, or was it between the armistice of 1918 and the beginning of the war with the Italian invasion of 1936. So it's literally just an 18-year period between these wars. 18-year period, that's just one birth generation. So this was like pile on at the beginning, the first half of the 20th century. It was really quite disruptive. So we had to give a detailed hallmarks of the interim period between these wars, and then I had to lay out this idea of fascism versus democracy, quote unquote democracy, colonial empires, and neo-colonialism. Because I'm not saying that democracy did not exist, even though one might also counter argue that in those places, especially around this time period, the first half of the 20th century, those places that were called democracies were really more about plutocracies and or aristocracies, where you had the rule of royal families still dominating in places like Belgium, in places like UK. Royal family dominance. So it's hard to say that that's a democracy when it's actually a monarchy. Very important. So the next part was, again, this chronology, breaking down key events of this period. And there's just so many events. I had to really kind of separate them. We separated them into key events of 1939, 1940, 1941, 1942, 43, 44, and 45. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of the Continental World War. But then that we had to go back to 1936 and include the Italian invasion of Italy as the commencement of hostilities. Along with 1936 through 1939, the fascist support of Francisco Franco's assault against the democratically elected government of socialist Spain. So we do the best we can to do the best we can, and we strive to do it in a more comprehensive way than others have done it before us. Why? Because you deserve it. I do see one comment. Jaco Batsi, I'm already subscribers to you, but realized I wasn't getting any live notifications. Just logged in and had to resubscribe again. And great to have you with us, Jaco. Great to have you with us, man. You have found your family in a peaceful place. So that's what we do around here. What do you think? Anybody have any opinions? Make sure you hit the like button on your viewing browser. If you're in the house today, actually looking at the numbers, I have a fairly large audience. And like Brother Jaco, please do subscribe to the channel so you get our notifications. And to the best of our abilities, we're going to be here with you, for you, by your side, alongside, pulling together in the same direction. Because I do believe that most of us want a world where we have gone beyond the brutality of war and conflict, bombs and steels, rockets and missiles, nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction. Where we've gone beyond the lies and distortions of psychological warfare operations and propaganda. We want that world. It might seem utopian, but at least we want a world in which those destructive values are diminished consistently with each passing decade, with each passing generation. As it is right now, the world is in a very precarious position. Again, this book, Disaster Preparedness for World Wars 5 and 6. The next time we get together, we're going to very clearly delineate what was World War III. It's not yet completed. It's still the last battle of World War III is ongoing. And that would be the war pitting Russia versus Ukraine and NATO. That's still the Cold War. That's also opening salvos of World War VI. We're going to get to that, which I call NATO Western Alliance versus BRICS Plus. Today, or actually yesterday, began the 2024 BRICS Summit taking place in Moscow. There'll be some significant reports to share on that. As we go to sign off today, I just want to share some of the key points I made today. Also, in these highlights, I asked the search engines, give me some quotes about the significance of World War II. And I have these couple of quotes from George Santayana. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. From the Israeli general, Moshe Dayan, if you want to make peace, you don't talk to your friends. You talk to your enemies. If you want to make peace, you don't talk to your friends, you talk to your enemies. That's a very profound and true statement. Martin Luther King said, hate multiplies hate. Violence multiplies violence. And toughness multiplies toughness in a descending spiral of destruction. The chain reaction of evil, hate begetting hate, wars producing more wars must be broken, or we shall be plunged into the dark abyss of annihilation. That from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And that is just such an important statement. I'm going to have to find a way to push that one into the book. And let me just push that up right here. Again, from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Very, very profound statement. Jim Wallace writes, the way to achieve peace is not to be pacifist, but to be anti-violent. To be pro-peace, you have to work for justice. Very profound. Very profound. And last statement, quotation I'll share, dealing with the issues of war and peace, from Mahatma Gandhi. What difference does it make to the dead, the orphans, and the homeless, whether the mad destruction is wrought under the name of totalitarianism or the holy name of liberty or democracy? What difference does it make to the dead, the orphans, and the homeless? It's very true. You've been tuned into LIB Radio, LIB TV, and livinginblack.com. Before I leave today, I just want to remind people, we are not powerless. We are not impotent. We're just unfocused. And much of the reason for our lack of focus, commitment, action, follow through, completion, collection of our rewards is because we have become subject to a controlling matrix. We're going to go deep into the nature of that controlling matrix when we look at World War V, which is the battle of the corporate oligarchy against the workers' middle class. World War V. Now, once we come to that understanding, and I hope I've at least got you thinking about it right now. Once we come to that understanding, then actions are the only thing that's going to advance our team's position in this game, this contest. Again, what I'm speaking right now from is game theory. The game exists, the contest exists. The players in the game are stepping forward. There can be multiple players, and it could be 7 against 1. The strategies employed by the players are intended toward the wisest, best positioning of the group. And lastly, the victory is measured in tangibilities, in the gains from winning in game theory. So I'm saying all of that to say this: in World War V, the nouveau colonial corporatists versus the workers' middle class, we're going to have to start taking back our hegemony. Among the things, I'm going to say 3 things we can do right now. Number 1, you're going to have to wrestle your health back and your health strategy back away from these beastly people, these beastly corporations. You're going to have to fight to take your health back from them. And I don't see a lot of ambiguity in this fight. It is a real fight, and we're going to have to come up with real strategies to take our health back. I can help. I'm very, very good at it. The book that's coming out, you've heard us talk a lot about the book, Living Superfood Solutions, Dietary Strategies to Prevent and Reverse Common Chronic Diseases. These common chronic diseases are the chains around our wrists and around our ankles and around our necks. They've got us bound in and exploiting us to death. I have a plan for reversing that, but you need to know about the plan. So in fighting back, we come up with strategies. Jocko Batzi is in the house. He said, "This is Jacques. Great to have you in the house, brother Jacques. Always, always. You and I have been together for 30 years. He said the Zionist neocons are obsessed with Russia. Yep, but also, I'm sure you know, brother Jacques, the Zionist neocons are obsessed with China. They are obsessed with industrial powers rising. They are terrified by the idea of BRICS Plus. Check your headlines, check the news headlines about any Western coverage about the BRICS conference taking place this week. It's already began yesterday, taking place this week in Russia. And read what they have to say. And of course, as you know, Brother Jacques, we always, and we long ago learned to read between the lines. What are they saying? What are they not saying that others outside of that sphere, and he talked about the Zionist neocons, what others outside of that sphere are saying about what is taking place in Moscow. So very, very important. Great to have you in the house, Brother Jacques. Always, always, always. Good to know that I am because we are. Last quote I'll share for today is again from George Orwell. I pulled up all these quotes and I think I somehow find a way to weave them into the program. And so this one I'm going to share right now from George Orwell. The further a society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. The further a society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. Profound, very profound. And we welcome you, our listening audience, always to contribute to the program. Luckily for me, Brother Jacques in the house today gave some love, for which he is appreciated, no doubt. On that note, I want to wrap it up for today. It's been a good day here on LA Radio. Not bad. Oh, I was about to say, if you want help, if you want and need help taking your body back from the med pharma cartel, text me and I can help. And that is 702-580-0662. I'd be glad to help. I can help. We've trained ourselves. We've worked real, real hard to be able to stand up and give ourselves a better chance at the future than what the Matrix has put on the table for us to deal with. So on that note, we are completed for today. You've been tuned into your favorite. We aim to be your favorite. We are LIB Radio, LIB TV. We are living in black.com. And on that note, I think we got it all in. Just copy, cut, and paste these last little bit of links so people can know how to get in contact with us and take advantage of the services. I do offer this as a service, people. This is what I do for as a living. And because I offer it as a service, I want to do the best I can to help as many people who would hold out your hand, just ask for help. Let me teach you how to cook, how to eat. Where a lot of us, we just need to know that much. And on that note, it looks like things might be crashing down in the background here. Let me see if I can clear up a little bit of buffer and get this thing to act right. I am out of here for today. LIB Radio, LIB TV, and livinginblack.com. Play some bumper music. Tomorrow, Wednesday, I think we're probably going to go to the BRICS Summit because that's a very, very important part of our discussion about the events happening in the world. But something might come up that will have precedence. You never know. We'd like to be responsive. I do want to also just take a moment here to send out our empathies, our sympathies with the Gullah Geechee people who yesterday actually, was a terrible event that happened. The story up. Witnesses described frantic rescue efforts after Georgia dock gangway collapses, killing 7. This was leading to the ferries. Tiny Sapelo Islands, Gullah Geechee community of African enslavement descendants. It shows you the neglect of the infrastructure, the neglect of the humanity of the Gullah Geechee people. And I'm holding black politicians particularly responsible for this. We can do better than that as we understand the critical importance of preserving the Gullah Geechee culture for our people, for this and for future generations. So I put up that link here so we can all know much more about what is going on there with the Gullah, the Geechee, the people, the public, our past, present, and of course, our future. Peace and prosperity to each and every one of you. On your favorite, we aim to be your favorite. We are LIB Radio, LIB TV, and livinginblack.com. Peace, y'all.